I had been inside Blackwood Estate less than 3 hours when I heard glass shatter outside the locked study. The sound split the second-floor corridor so sharply that I dropped the basket of pressed shirts in my arms. One of Cassian Rourke's white dress shirts slid across the runner at my feet. Farther down the hall, two security men froze in front of the study door, and beyond them stood the man I had been hired to serve. Cassian was barefoot, broad-shouldered, and still dressed in dark trousers and a black shirt with the sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. A crystal tumbler lay shattered near the baseboard. One of his hands was braced against the study door. The other gripped an old brass key so tightly that blood had started to run across his palm. He looked like a powerful man, being dragged under by something no one else could see. The agency had described him as private, demanding, and in need of a discreet live-in maid. Maribel Shaw, who had recommended me personally, had been more honest during the drive to Vermont. "Mr. Rourke is not a cruel man," she had said, "but he is an exhausted one. If he ever falls asleep in a chair, do not shake him. Say his name first. And if you hear him pacing after midnight, let him pace." At the time I thought she meant he was moody. Standing in that corridor, I realized she meant the entire house had rearranged itself around one man's refusal to sleep. "Open it," Cassian said. One of the guards swallowed. "Ms. Helena said no one should enter the study tonight." Cassian turned his head just enough to silence him. "I know what Helena said. Open the door." Nobody moved. That was when the question at the center of Blackwood settled into place. Why was the most feared man in the house the only one shut out of the truth behind that locked door? I should have stayed silent. It was my first night. I was 33, newly divorced, nearly broke, and trying to rebuild a life that had collapsed faster than I could explain it. Instead, I stepped over the broken glass and spoke. "Mr. Rourke." His eyes cut to me. They were dark, sleepless, and so tightly controlled that the exhaustion behind them felt more dangerous than anger. "You were bleeding," I said. He glanced down at the key in his fist as if he had forgotten it was there. Blood slid over his knuckles. "I asked for the door," he said. "And if they open it while you're like this," I said, keeping my voice even, "you won't trust whatever you find." A strange stillness passed over his face. He studied me for one long second, then held out the key. The nearest guard looked at me as if I had lost my mind. I took the key anyway and gave it to him. "First aid kit," I said. "Not orders, not opinions. A first aid kit." Then I looked back at Cassian. "And you need to sit down." Something like disbelief flickered across his face. "You don't know who you're speaking to." "I do," I said. "I'm speaking to the reason nobody else in this house is sleeping either." One of the guards made a choked sound. Cassian's mouth almost curved. Then the tension went out of him by a fraction. Only a fraction, but enough that I could guide him to the bench beneath the window at the end of the corridor. Up close, the signs of insomnia were brutal. Trembling fingers, shadows under the eyes, skin stretched too tightly across sharp cheekbones. He was still a handsome man, but in the weathered, dangerous way of cliffs after a long winter. While I wrapped his hand with linen from the housekeeping cabinet, I asked quietly, "What's in the study?" His gaze lifted to mine. "If I knew that," he said, "you wouldn't be bandaging me at 1 a.m. It wasn't really an answer. It was an admission that he no longer trusted his own memory. The next morning, Maribel found me in the linen room before sunrise, rolling towels I had already rolled once. "You stayed," she said. "I nearly didn't." The calm of a woman who had spent years surviving other people's crises. At 59, Maribel had the kind of quiet authority that made panic feel childish. "How much did you see?" "Enough to know your warning was incomplete." Her expression softened. "All warnings are incomplete. Otherwise no one would walk into a storm." I folded another towel. "What is he afraid of?" "Memory," she said. "That's not enough. He tells you the rest himself." Before I could press her, Helena Rourke appeared in the doorway. If Cassian looked dangerous because he was fraying, Helena looked dangerous because she never frayed at all. She was 55, elegant, perfectly composed, and dressed at 7 a.m. as if she had expected an audience. Her pale gaze skimmed over me and decided I belonged at the edges of rooms. "So, you're the new maid," she said. "I was told you were practical." "I try to be practical enough not to involve yourself in matters outside your employment." She smiled without warmth. "My brother's health is being handled." Maribel answered before I could. "If it were being handled, Helena, half the staff would not sound as if they were living in a prayer circle." Helena's expression sharpened. We are discussing family concerns. You began by addressing the employee, Maribel replied. A beat of silence passed between them. Then Helena turned back to me. Clean the east rooms. Leave the study corridor alone. She left without waiting for a response. Why does she want me near the study? I asked. Curiosity recognizes locked doors, Maribel said. I had spent the last year trying not to be curious about anything painful. My divorce had taken my savings, my small business, and most of my appetite for drama. I wanted work that was simple, dependable, and well paid. I wanted enough money to stand on my own again. Instead, by my third day at Blackwood, I was dusting Cassian's study and staring at a pattern that made my stomach tighten. On the mantel sat 3 objects arranged with exact spacing, a silver lighter, an ivory letter opener, and a small bronze horse. On the side table near the sofa, I noticed their outlines in the dust. They had been placed there before, in a different order. When I finished and stepped into the hall, Cassian was standing a few feet away watching the closed study door. You moved them, I said before I could stop myself. The mantelpieces? His brows lifted. And if I did? Then you're not decorating. You're trying to rating. You're trying to remember something. For the first time since I had met him, genuine interest broke through the exhaustion on his face. Maribel was right about you, he said. That sounds like the beginning of a problem, beginning of an answer. That night he asked me to bring tea to the library. When I entered, he gestured to the chair opposite him. I don't usually discuss personal matters with employees, he said. Then I'd better sit before you change your mind. A briefer, tired laugh escaped him. It changed his whole face. Then he told me what sleep had become. Every time he drifted off, he found himself in the same moment. The study door was locked. He knew there had once been a ledger inside, or one should have been. He heard a woman say, "Tell the truth." Sometimes she sounded furious. Sometimes she sounded frightened. He reached for the door, and then he woke. How long? I asked. Almost 6 months, anniversary of my mother's death. I let that settle. Do you think the woman is your mother? His jaw tightened. I think it could be. My family insists I'm stitching grief into something larger. And what do you think? He looked toward the fire. I think something happened the night she died. I think I knew it once. And I think someone has spent years making sure I never put it together. That should have been the point where I excused myself and went back to laundering sheets. Instead, I asked, why not hire an investigator? He said. Because my relatives know how to perform honesty when they were being watched. Because men around me tell me what they think I want to hear. His gaze met mine. You don't, he said. And tell me what you notice. So I did. I noticed the old house inventories in the service office had been relabeled twice in the last decade, but only the files covering the West Wing had missing pages. I noticed the study lock had been replaced 3 months earlier, even though the doorframe itself was much older. I noticed Cassian kept rearranging the same objects at night as if he were rebuilding a room from memory, and by morning someone had quietly put them back in their old places. I noticed something else too. He never asked me to flatter him. He asked for facts. That was why Helena moved against me quickly. The first trap looked almost childish. On my 6th morning, I wheeled my housekeeping cart into the guest corridor and found a sealed legal envelope tucked beneath folded bathrobes. My name was written across the front. Inside were copies of private trust documents involving one of Cassian's holding companies. Helena found me with them exactly minutes later. How interesting, she said, staring at the papers in my hands. I wonder how those came to be in your cart. 2 junior staff members stood behind her. I saw at once what the scene was meant to become. The curious maid caught snooping where she did not belong. Panic would have made me look guilty. Anger would have made me look unstable. So I chose precision. I'd like the laundry log reviewed, I said. Helena blinked. What? 10 until 8:16 while I carried blankets to the south rooms. Mrs. Doyle signed the sheet when I removed them. Mr. Pena signed it when I returned for towels. If these were planted, it happened in that window. Helena's eyes narrowed. You prepared that explanation quickly. Records quickly, I said. It helps when other people get imaginative. One of the younger staff, a pantry maid named Liza, went pale but spoke anyway. Mrs. Rourke, I did see Mr. Everett's assistant in the linen press this morning. He said he was looking for tablecloths. Helena turned toward the girl with perfect, polished displeasure. Then she took the envelope from me and left without another word. I expected consequences. I did not expect Cassian to invite me to supper. It isn't supper, I told Maribel when she informed me. It's an interrogation with plates. The lamb, she said. The chef only makes it when the house is pretending to be civilized. Cassian was already seated when I entered the smaller dining room off the library. He stood when I came in, which startled me enough that I stopped in the doorway. You were either unusually polite, I said, or about to ask a difficult question. Both. He asked about the envelope incident first, and only once. After that he asked about me. Where I grew up. What I had done before Blackwood. Whether I missed owning a business. In return, he gave me fragments about himself. His late mother had loved the estate but hated how often family strategy arrived disguised as family loyalty. He had spent the last decade pushing more of the Rourke empire into legitimate business because he wanted the future to look different from the past. Then why keep so many relatives near you? I asked. He rotated his wine glass once without drinking. Because loyalty taught early can disguise itself as duty for a very long time. I thought about that long after dinner ended. Over the next 2 weeks, our routines became intimate in the strangest way. Not physical. Not yet even romantic. But intimate all the same. He slept best in 20-minute stretches in the library chair, with the fire low. I sorted old ledgers at the long table beside him. He began leaving boxes of records for me after midnight. I returned them with flagged pages and notes in the margins. Duplicate vendor number replaced lock hardware, missing West Wing inventory page, inconsistent signature pressure. He never praised me too much. He simply started relying on me. That was more dangerous than compliments. The real turning point came on a rain-heavy Thursday in the basement records room. I was sorting old maintenance binders when I found a slim file misfiled inside a crate marked Chapel Repairs. The date on the spine matched the night of Cassian's recurring memory. Inside, between boiler inspections and gutter repairs, was a handwritten request for emergency locksmith access to the study at 1:14 a.m. The approval signature had been scratched over hard enough to tear the paper, and beneath it someone had later written, "Entry cancelled. Room never opened." Except it had been opened. The lock company's stamp service code proved the mechanism had been disengaged. I carried the binder straight to the library. Cassian looked up the moment he saw my face. What happened? I set the binder open on the desk. Your memory isn't just grief. The study door was opened that night, and someone falsified the record afterward. He stared at the page in silence. I was told, he said at last, that the study remained locked until after my mother was found in her room, says otherwise. He sat down very slowly. Shock moved through him, but beneath it I saw something colder taking shape. Who else knows? He asked. No one yet. Good. From now on, anything you find comes only to me or Maribel. You think your family altered the records? Well, I think someone did, he said. And the list of people I am willing to exclude gets shorter every day. That discovery should have brought us closer. Instead, it made the house more dangerous. Helena began appearing at breakfast as if she meant to monitor every breath Cassian took. Everett Rourke, Cassian's 44-year-old cousin, started lingering near the records office with the smooth confidence of a man who mistook charm for innocence. Well, I hear you've become indispensable, he said one afternoon while I checked provision receipts. I hear many things in this house, I said. He smiled. Observation can look a lot like ambition when a woman practices it too openly. And manipulation can look a lot like family concern when a man does. His smile thinned. You should remember where you work, I said. That's why I label everything. The second trap arrived 2 days later, as missing money. Mrs. Doyle, the head housekeeper I officially reported to, entered my room holding a printed expense summary. 3 reimbursements had been authorized under household maintenance and signed with my initials. The amounts were small enough to seem plausible, large enough to damage trust. Why didn't it approve any of this? I said. Mrs. Doyle lowered her voice. I thought perhaps not. The initials are wrong. They were. I always put a short tail on my eye. These were plain strokes copied by someone who had seen my name but not my hand. I took the page to Cassian's office and found Everett already there. Everett spread his hands, wanted transparency. Cassian said nothing. He was watching me, not the paper. I pointed to the transaction column. These use approval numbers from the transportation division, not household maintenance. Whoever forged them copied the wrong ledger. Also, line 3 repeats a sequence issued last month to one of your freight depots. I looked at Everett. You are going to fake theft Don't do it around someone who notices numbering systems. For the first time, Everett looked rattled. Cassian's expression barely changed, but his voice turned to ice. Leave us. When Everett was gone, the room fell silent. You expected me to doubt you, Cassian said. I expected you to consider the possibility. Though I did. The honesty stung. Then I watched you read the page like a map. I said, you have to decide whether you trust evidence when it comes from me, not only when it confirms what you already suspect. He stood. Don't know that? I think exhaustion makes cowards of people who are brave in every other room. The words landed hard. Silence stretched between us. Then he crossed the space between the desk and the door, stopping close enough that I could see the tired gold flecks in his eyes. You are the only person in this house, he said quietly. Lo speaks to me as if being feared is not the same as being obeyed. And you've, though my pulse had started to race, were the only employer I've ever had who makes insomnia feel like a boardroom war. That low, worn laugh came again. This time it stayed. By the end of that week, I knew I was in trouble. Not because Helena hated me. Not because Everett wanted me gone. Because I had started listening for Cassian's footsteps after midnight the way other women might listen for a lover's knock. One rainy night I found him asleep in the library chair at last, his head tilted back, one hand still resting on an open ledger. I laid a wool throw over him and turned to leave. Virus. My name in his half-sleeping voice stopped me. A minute, he said. I sat across from him while the fire burned low. Do you know the worst part of this? He asked. The sleep? Know exactly what will happen if I close my eyes, and every night I pretend the result might change. He rubbed a hand over his face. When you arrived, I thought you would last 3 days. And now? Profound mistake letting you through the gate. But for my sake or yours? His gaze held mine. Maid, that depends who has more to lose. I knew then that what was growing between us was no longer only trust. That was precisely when the family struck hardest. Cassian had started asking me to help sort vendor contracts for Rourke Holdings because I knew the household records better than anyone and because, as he put it, sloppy numbers offended me on a moral level. 3 days after I flagged several shell companies with inconsistent addresses, Helena walked into the lower business office with Everett, 2 attorneys, and a printed memo bearing my name. According to the memo, I had recommended urgent approval of a consulting payment to an outside compliance firm. The payment had already gone out. The firm did not exist. The receiving account linked back to one of the shell companies I had flagged. Helena placed the memo on the table. This is beyond house matters now. She has inserted herself into business operations and compromised the company. I looked at the page once and knew it had been assembled from pieces of sentence copied from my notes. My digital initials imitated badly the wrong font in the date field. But none of that mattered if Cassian stopped believing me. He entered from the side hall while Helena was still speaking. The room fell silent. He picked up the memo, read it, and looked at me. Did you send this? It was the first time he had ever asked me a question like that in front of everyone. No. It? Helena asked smoothly, I said. But not in the next 10 seconds, which I suspect was the point. Cassian's jaw tightened. Everett leaned back as if victory had already arrived. I waited for Cassian to dismiss them and give me time. He didn't. Access log pulled, he said at last. Helena folded her arms. By then the damage will be done. Then perhaps you should have thought of that before bringing me forged paperwork as theater. His tone was icy, but he still had not cleared me in front of the others. I felt the shift at once. The staff would feel it too. So I did the only thing that left any dignity intact. I removed my key ring from my pocket and set it on the table. You can review the logs without me, I said. I resign effective immediately. Every head turned. Cassian looked at me as if I had spoken in a language he did not know. Warris, past pleading. I didn't come here to spend my life proving my honesty to people, committed to mistaking access for guilt. If you want the truth, decide whether you can bear it before someone else rewrites it again. I walked out. I made it to the staff staircase before Maribel caught my wrist. You were leaving too, early, she said. I am leaving exactly when I should, moment they most need you gone. For the first time, steel cut through her calm. She reached into her bag and withdrew a yellowed envelope. Evelyn Rourke gave me this years ago. She told me to hide it unless the family ever tried to rewrite the night of the study. I stared at the handwriting, on the front, for the person who still looks closely. Why didn't you give it to Cassian? Asked. Because grief turned him into a fortress, Maribel said. And because the people nearest him were already shaping what he believed. You made him start asking the right question again. Inside was a single page in Cassian's mother's hand. If Cassian ever doubts himself more than them, look where the records were sent when the chapel was repaired. They will hide truth in sacred places because no one thinks to accuse reverence of theft. Below that was one last line. Tell my son he was never the one I feared. I look up sharply. The chapel repairs. That misfiled maintenance binder. Maribel nodded. Maribel nodded. The archive chest was what moved during restoration. Helena oversaw it herself. The answer had been circling us the whole. Blackwood's stone chapel sat beyond the formal gardens, half hidden by fir trees and old family pride. Maribel and I went at dusk, by the path behind the greenhouse. The chapel smelled of cold stone and candle wax. At the back stood a cedar document chest with brass corners and a carved cross on the lid. Inside were hymnals, memorial cards, donation records, and nothing else. Too obvious, I murmured. I ran my hands along the interior seams. The base felt slightly uneven near the right corner. I pressed harder and heard the faintest hollow shift. False, bottom. I found the notch under the lip and lifted the panel. Inside lay a black leather ledger wrapped in oilcloth, 3 unsigned authorization forms, an old key tag marked study, and a packet of bank correspondence tied with fading green ribbon. Months of sleeplessness. Years of manipulation. A whole house trapped by one missing truth. I opened the ledger, and the scale of the betrayal came into focus. The entries detailed legitimate business transfers, approved during Evelyn Rourke's final illness and the months after her death. Some authorizations bore Cassian's signature, but not his handwriting. Others carried emergency family approvals routed through Helena and Everett. Funds had been diverted from verified vendors to shell firms, then into side agreements that gave Helena and Everett leverage over trucking routes, storage properties, and insurance contracts. It was one theft. It was a long campaign to weaken Cassian's control while keeping him publicly responsible. At the back of the packet was the oldest wound of all. An unsigned statement drafted by Evelyn naming her belief that Helena and Everett had opened the study the night she confronted them, hidden the ledger after she collapsed, and then used Cassian's grief to bury the truth. He had reached the hall in time to hear her demand honesty, but not in time to understand what he was hearing. By morning, the room had been relocked, the official story rewritten, and his fractured memory dismissed as grief. He hadn't been staying awake because he was merely afraid of bad dreams. He had been staying awake because part of him knew sleep was taking him back to the last moment his mother had tried to protect him, and he still didn't know from what. I said. We need Cassian, Maribel replied. First, we need proof that survives tonight. We carried the ledger and documents to Maribel's cottage at the edge of the estate, where she kept an old scanner and a locked file cabinet from her years as private nurse and confidant. I copied every page twice, photographed the signatures, and made a clean index. Hidden ledger forged approvals, chapel concealment study key tag, maintenance misfiling shell accounts, Evelyn's note. Documentation had saved me before. It would save me again. Only after everything was backed up did I go back to the main house. Cassian was in the library alone, standing rigidly by the fire. He looked up so sharply when I entered that I knew he had been waiting. Where were you? He asked. Finding the answer. I set the copied file on the table. And deciding whether you were ready to hear it. His gaze dropped to the stack, then rose again. You found the ledger, I said. And with your mother's. I handed him Evelyn's note first. He read it once, then again. His hand trembled at the last line. Tell my son he was never the one I feared, he read softly. I had seen Cassian angry, exhausted, and controlled. I had never seen him wounded and relieved at the same time. She knew, he said. She knew enough to hide proof where Helena would think piety protected it. He read the ledger in silence. As the minutes passed, his expression changed from pain to cold clarity. When Helena told me the study never opened, he said finally, I believed her because I wanted at least one thing that night to be simple. You were grieving. Why was convenient. He closed the ledger. No more. At me. Why should have defended you in that office without hesitation, I said. He accepted the answer. And yet you came back, for the truth. A pause. Only the truth? Honesty felt less like courage than surrender. No, I said. Not only the truth. Something warmer than gratitude moved across his face. Iris, if I touch you now, he said, voice rough with restraint, I need to know I am not asking from relief alone. You are asking from trust, I said. And so am I. He lifted a hand, waited for my permission, and brushed his knuckles against my cheek. The tenderness of it undid me more than anything dramatic could have. We finish this first, he murmured. Yes. Na sleep, jaw once. When I wake, I intend to be less patient. The confrontation happened the next morning in the formal drawing room. Cassian summoned Helena, Everett the family attorneys, the chief financial officer of Rourke Holdings, Maribel Mrs. Doyle, and 3 senior staff members whose records I had relied on. He did not place me behind him. He set a chair at his right hand and told me to sit there. That mattered more than a speech. Helena noticed at once. Cassian, surely this is unnecessary, he said. What was unnecessary was 6 months of allowing this house to mistake manipulation for loyalty. Everett tried a smile. If this is about the memo, we can resolve the misunderstanding privately. Cassian laid the forged memo on the table, then the copied ledger, Evelyn's note, the chapel key tag, and the maintenance record. Would either of you like to explain why family business records were hidden beneath chapel documents after my mother collapsed? For once, Helena had no immediate answer. Everett reached first for outrage. This is absurd, he said. A maid and an aging employee find dusty papers and suddenly we're staging accusations? Maribel's chin lifted. I was at your aunt's bedside when you still needed help tying your shoes, Everett. If you intend to speak down to me, do it with better posture. Even then, I nearly smiled. Helena recovered faster. Grief has made you vulnerable to suggestion. These documents could have been planted by anyone, desperate to gain influence. Why by me? I asked. She turned to me with icy composure. You have shown remarkable interest in matters beyond your station, I said. Have shown remarkable interest in station whenever evidence appears. I slid my index notes forward. The signature pressure on the false approvals matches your legal correspondence, not Cassian's. The shell firm paid by the forged memo receives transfers from 2 accounts, first redirected in the hidden ledger. The maintenance binder proving the study was opened was misfiled under chapel repairs, the same restoration during which the archive chest was moved. Mrs. Doyle can confirm the numbering discrepancies I flagged weeks ago. Mr. Pena can confirm the inventory relabeling dates. And the retired bank officer named in this correspondence has already verified the paper stock used by your office 9 years ago. Helena's composure cracked at the edges. You went outside the house? I said. Truth breathes better there. Cassian rose. No one else did. News, he said, looking first at Helena, then Everett. She knew enough to hide proof from her own family. I have spent half a year waking to the sound of her voice and being told it meant nothing. All the while you used my name to route your own decisions through businesses I built to keep this family legitimate. Everett pushed back his chair. You can prove. I signed everything. Cassian's expression turned cold. I do not need to prove every theft in this room before removing you from my life. I need only prove enough to know you should never again be near my decisions. Helena's mask finally slipped. I've done to preserve this family. You preserved your access, Cassian cut in. Not this family. Not me. He turned to the chief financial officer. Effective immediately, Helena Rourke and Everett Rourke are removed from all decision-making authority across Rourke Holdings, Blackwood Estate, and any affiliated operation. Freeze every discretionary account they touch until the outside auditors finish review. Helena stared at him. You would humiliate your own blood for her? This time, Cassian answered without hesitation. I would remove my own blood for the truth, he said. The fact that you forced her to carry it for me should humiliate you, not me. Silence filled the room. Everett began protesting until 2 security men appeared at the doors. Helena straightened her coat, looked at me and said, Enjoy the promotion. Houses like this always punish women who forget how they entered them. I met her gaze. Then it's fortunate I am leaving this room differently than I entered it. They were escorted out. Only after the doors closed did the room exhale. Cassian thanked the staff members who had kept records no one else valued. Then he looked at me. Boris Calder came to this estate as an employee, he said. She leaves this room as the person who did more to protect my mother's truth, my name, and my legitimate businesses than anyone carrying the Rourke surname. Effective today, if she accepts, she will oversee internal operations review across my legal holdings. Full authority. Direct to me. I stared at him. That is not a small offer, he said. It is the first honest one I have made you. After that, the house changed. Staff spoke at normal volume again. The study remained open. Auditors came and went. Everett sent messages no one answered. Helena left the estate by evening, still carrying herself like a queen in exile. Cassian slept that night before midnight. Not in the library chair. In his own room. He asked me to sit with him, for a few minutes first, not because he feared the memory anymore, but because peace felt unfamiliar to both of us. We sat on the sofa in his bedroom suite with the mountain air coming in through the cracked windows. "What if it comes back?" he asked quietly. "The memory?" He nodded. "Come back alone," I said. "Now it has names, context proof. Your mother was trying to tell the truth, not torment you." He looked at me for a long moment. "Do you know what you gave me? A reason to fire half your relatives?" His mouth curved, to stop punishing myself for not remembering fast enough. That reached deeper than any grand declaration could have. He took my hand. "I meant what I said. When I wake, I intend to be less patient." "That sounds dangerous. You tell me." He turned my hand over slowly, his thumb brushing the center of my palm. "I am 49 years old," he said. "I have negotiated with men who expected me to blink first, and survived family wars dressed as board meetings. None of that prepared me for the discipline required not to kiss you every time you walk into a room carrying corrected records." I laughed despite myself. That may be the least romantic sentence anyone has ever said to me. And yet, hand to his mouth and kissed my knuckles first, as if asking one last time. When I leaned toward him, he met me halfway. The kiss wasn't hurried. It felt earned. Weeks of trust, tension, conflict, and sleepless nights settled into one clear answer. I hadn't realized how starved I was to be looked at as if my steadiness itself mattered until that moment. When we parted, his forehead rested briefly against mine. "You should sleep," I whispered. "Well, I probably can, mouth. Stay until I do." So I did. I sat by the window while he settled back against the pillows, not counting breaths, not waiting for him to jerk awake at the edge of another nightmare. Just watching the strain slowly leave his face. He fell asleep within minutes. And this time he stayed asleep. When morning came, I woke in the armchair to quiet sunlight and the scent of cedar and rain. Cassian was standing a few feet away, fully dressed and looking rested in a way that nearly transformed him. He was watching me with open wonder. "You slept," I said. "So did you." He crouched beside the chair and took my hands. 7 hours, he said, as if the number still felt impossible. No panic. No study door. Just sleep. Emotion rose in my throat so quickly I had to look away. "Varys, look at me." I did. "The first person I wanted to see when I woke up was you," he said. "Not only because you solved the mystery, not only because you protected what was left of my mother's truth, because somewhere between your impossible calm and your infuriating habit of being right, this house stopped feeling like a trap when you were in it." My eyes burned. That sounds very much like another non-minor offer. It is. It is. He stood and held out his hand. "Come downstairs. Have breakfast with me as something other than staff. Then, tell me whether you want the operations role, the guest cottage, and a future here that belongs to you by choice." I took his hand and stood. Helena believed houses like Blackwood existed to preserve the old order. She believed women entered through service doors and stayed where they were placed. She was wrong. I had been hired as the Mafia boss's maid, with practical shoes, spare uniforms, and no intention of changing anyone's life but my own. Instead, I found a sleepless man trapped between power and memory, a dead mother's warning hidden in sacred wood, and a family that mistook proximity for ownership. I also found something I had not expected to want again: trust that was earned slowly, tested honestly, and chosen in the open. That morning, as Cassian and I walked downstairs side by side, Blackwood no longer felt like a fortress organized around fear. It felt like a house, with its locked room finally opened. And when he asked me over breakfast whether I would stay help rebuild the legitimate business operations, and build something with him that was based on choice instead of need, I did not answer like a maid protecting a position. I answered like the woman who had uncovered the truth. "Yes," I said. "But only if we keep every door unlocked."